The U.S. Navy SEALs launched a biggest strike against one of the most valuable cartel strongholds. At first, it looked like the Sinaloa Cartel had built a fortress too strong to fall. But what happened in the next 30 minutes shocked everyone watching and crushed the cartel's billion-dollar empire. At 2 p.m., U.S. Navy SEALs stormed a fortified Sinaloa Cartel SuperLab deep inside the Sierra Madre Mountains. The target was not small. It was valued at nearly $3.7 billion and was one of the largest cartel facilities ever uncovered in Mexico. The SuperLab was designed to manufacture fentanyl and meth on an industrial scale, with massive chemical vats, hidden warehouses, and fortified bunkers. The cartel had poured money into it for years, turning the compound into a hub that could feed global markets across North America, Europe, and Asia. According to U.S. intelligence, shipments leaving this single lab were enough to poison entire cities in weeks. To the cartel, it was a crown jewel. To Washington, it was a threat that could not be ignored. The strike began in silence. Black Hawk helicopters hovered low, carrying SEAL assault teams toward the outer perimeter. At the same time, underwater drones and long-range surveillance aircraft confirmed live feeds from above the compound. The mission was simple in wording, but complex in execution. Eliminate the lab, secure any intelligence, rescue captives if found, and cripple the Sinaloa Cartel's most expensive project to date. For the SEALs, this was not just another raid. This was a direct hit at the heart of cartel logistics. The defenders had no warning. From the ridge lines above the lab, SEAL snipers armed with Mk-13 Mod 7 rifles took their first shots. Within seconds, rooftop lookouts were neutralized. Heavy-caliber rifles silenced cartel spotters before they could sound alarms. At the same time, SEAL breachers moved forward, carrying C4 packs to blast through reinforced steel gates. As the charges detonated, explosions ripped through the still night, lighting the mountains in bursts of fire. The silence was gone. The lab was now a battlefield. Inside the compound, cartel gunmen scrambled to respond. Over 250 guards were stationed across towers, barracks, and outer walls. Many of them grabbed RPG-29s, belt-fed PKM machine guns, and modified armored trucks to counter what they thought was a rival cartel raid. They were wrong. They were facing the most elite operators on the planet. Within minutes, chaos spread across the perimeter. SEAL electronic warfare teams activated powerful jammers, cutting off cartel radios and disabling drones used for surveillance. Communications inside the fortress collapsed. Fighters shouted orders in confusion, not knowing where the attack was coming from. Meanwhile, the first wave of air support joined in. Overhead, an AC-130 gunship opened fire with its 105mm howitzer, pounding cartel towers and ammo dumps. Secondary explosions erupted as stored munitions went up in flames. MQ-9 Reaper drones fired Hellfire missiles at fuel tanks and armored convoys moving toward the east side of the compound. The strikes were precise and devastating. Fireballs rose hundreds of feet into the sky. In minutes, what the cartel had called untouchable was being ripped apart piece by piece. For the cartel, the opening shock was overwhelming. Their billion-dollar SuperLab, which had taken years to build, was under full assault by America's most feared special forces. Within the first 15 minutes, the balance of power shifted. The lab was no longer a fortress, it was a trap, and the SEALs controlled every move. For weeks before the assault, U.S. intelligence had been watching the SuperLab from every angle. Satellites from the National Reconnaissance Office tracked convoys of trucks traveling under cover of night, hauling chemical precursors from hidden ports to the mountains. Drones from the CIA and U.S. Southern Command flew at high altitude, gathering infrared footage of stockpiles growing inside the facility. Reports confirmed thousands of barrels of toxic chemicals and stacks of cash worth millions stored in underground vaults. This was not just a drug lab, it was a cartel fortress, fortified like a military installation and protected by more gunmen than some army outposts. Recon confirmed over 250 cartel guards armed with machine guns, RPGs, and heavy vehicles mounted with DSHK heavy weapons. Sniper nests were built into ridgelines, camouflaged with shrubs and netting. Guard towers overlooked the entire valley, giving the cartel an advantage against any ground assault. Inside the compound, chemists worked in shifts around the clock, producing fentanyl pills and meth batches by the ton. Intelligence analysts estimated the lab produced enough fentanyl every week to flood multiple U.S. states with poison. The sheer scale of the operation made it clear this was not a cartel hideout. This was a billion-dollar enterprise, run like a corporation, defended like a fortress, and designed to keep U.S. and Mexican forces at bay. The mission planning was meticulous. Navy SEAL commanders, Delta Force advisors, and Air Force coordinators spent weeks rehearsing with satellite maps and digital simulations. They mapped out every entrance, exit, supply road, and choke point. Engineers identified weak spots in the perimeter walls and recommended breaching points. Sniper teams marked kill zones from higher elevations, while drone operators plotted routes to bypass cartel jammers. Electronic warfare teams were assigned to cut cartel comms the moment the raid began. Nothing was left to chance. Still, the risks were high. The cartel was known to use underground tunnels to smuggle fighters and weapons. The possibility of civilian hostages was also a concern. Human intelligence suggested cartel lieutenants often forced villagers or rival prisoners to work inside the facility. That meant SEAL teams would have to fight carefully in close quarters, distinguishing between civilians and cartel fighters in the chaos. Every second of hesitation could mean lives lost. The staging area was set at a forward operating base across the border, supported by Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters. C-130 gunships were put on standby, along with MQ-9 Reapers loaded with Hellfire missiles. Over 200 SEAL operators were divided into strike teams, breachers, snipers, electronic warfare units, and assault squads. Each had a clear objective. The breachers would break down the gates, the snipers would clear the high ground, and the assault squads would sweep through the main lab chambers. The operation was built to overwhelm the cartel in one coordinated strike, giving them no time to react. By the time 2:30 p.m. arrived, everything was in motion. SEAL teams moved silently under the cover of night, closing in on the compound. The setup was complete. The next step was execution, and the cartel had no idea their most valuable fortress was about to collapse. The first shots came fast and silent. At exactly 2:33 p.m., Navy SEAL snipers armed with Mk-13 Mod 7 rifles picked off the rooftop lookouts one by one. Within seconds, 4 cartel gunmen fell, their bodies collapsing against sandbags without raising alarms. Then, the compound's floodlights went dark as SEAL demolition teams detonated C4 on the transformers. Power vanished across the SuperLab, plunging the entire fortress into darkness. Panic spread inside as cartel fighters scrambled, unsure of what was happening. Before they could react, electronic warfare units jammed all radios and drone feeds. The cartel's ability to coordinate was cut in an instant. Moments later, the outer perimeter erupted. SEAL breachers used thermite torches and explosive charges to blow open the steel gates. Doors buckled, walls crumbled, and shockwaves rattled the valley. As the breaches opened, assault squads poured in with HK-416 rifles and MP-7 submachine guns, firing suppressed rounds at guards rushing to respond. Within the first 5 minutes, nearly 30 cartel fighters had been neutralized before they even knew the size of the force they were facing. At the same time, the sky above roared. MQ-9 Reapers released Hellfire missiles on guard towers at the edge of the compound. One tower exploded in a fireball, its heavy DSHK machine gun launching into the air before crashing back down. Another missile shredded a small ammo dump, setting off secondary blasts that lit up the horizon. Overhead, an AC-130 gunship joined in, its 105mm howitzer and 40mm Bofors cannons tearing through defensive positions. The thunder of artillery echoed across the mountains, shaking windows miles away. The cartel fortress, once believed impenetrable, was collapsing under precision firepower. Inside, chaos ruled. Cartel lieutenants screamed orders, trying to rally fighters to hold the main chemical halls. Tracer rounds lit up the night as surviving gunmen fired RPG-29s and belt-fed PKM machine guns toward the breaches, but their firepower was blind. They didn't know where the SEAL teams were striking from, and their comms were dead. Every attempt to regroup ended in ambush, as snipers hidden in the ridge lines eliminated anyone trying to escape the kill zone. By 2:42 p.m., the first major section of the compound was in U.S. control. SEAL squads swept through barracks and warehouses, clearing each room with flashbangs and suppressive fire. Dozens of cartel fighters surrendered, their morale broken by the overwhelming force bearing down on them. Others tried to hide among the chemists, but SEAL operators quickly separated civilians from combatants. The precision and discipline of the raid kept civilian casualties low, despite the intensity of the fight. The opening clash left the cartel reeling. Their heavy weapons were silenced, their towers destroyed, and their gates blown wide open. The U.S. forces had complete control of the battlefield, and the assault was only just beginning. What came next would turn the cartel's billion-dollar lab into ash. By 3:10 p.m., the operation was complete. The SuperLab that once stood as the crown jewel of the Sinaloa Cartel was now reduced to smoking ruins. Over 170 cartel fighters had been killed in the firefight, while 80 others were captured alive, including several senior lieutenants and lab managers. Their weapons were seized, their radios silenced, and their leaders taken in chains. Dozens of chemists were pulled from the wreckage, rescued and secured before they could be forced to continue production under cartel control. Inside the compound, Navy SEAL search teams uncovered vast stockpiles. Barrels of precursor chemicals filled entire warehouses alongside finished fentanyl pills and meth bricks stacked like walls. In total, over 300 tons of chemicals and more than $50 million in packaged narcotics were seized before flames consumed the rest. Even more shocking was the discovery of hidden vaults stuffed with cash, blood money totaling nearly $200 million US, pesos, and euros. These funds, meant to fuel cartel expansion across the Americas, were now in U.S. custody. Every major facility inside the SuperLab was destroyed. The chemical halls collapsed under fire and explosions, silencing production lines that churned out drugs for global markets. Vehicle depots, armored trucks, and weapons caches were blown apart, leaving behind twisted steel and craters. From the sky, the flames could be seen for miles, pillars of black smoke climbing high into the morning air. What was once a fortress of cartel power was now a graveyard of burning wreckage. For the U.S., the success was total. 0 casualties were reported among the Navy SEALs, Delta Force advisors, and air support crews. The mission was carried out with precision timing, overwhelming firepower, and ruthless efficiency. Every road into and out of the compound had been sealed, ensuring no reinforcements arrived and no cartel fighters escaped. The strike eliminated not only a production site, but also the financial core of the Sinaloa cartel's operations. The wider impact was immediate. Without the $3.7 billion SuperLab, cartel supply chains were crippled overnight. Shipments of fentanyl into the United States slowed to a trickle, cutting into the cartel's profits and weakening their ability to bribe officials or fund violence. Across Mexico, rival groups saw the devastation and recognized the message: no facility, no matter how remote or fortified, was beyond America's reach. For the communities terrorized by cartel power, the raid was a rare moment of hope. The message to the Sinaloa cartel was brutal and final: your fortress was never safe. The U.S. Navy SEALs proved that they can strike anywhere, at any time, with overwhelming force. For Washington, the raid was more than an interdiction. It was a declaration of dominance in the war on narco-terror. And for the cartel, the warning was clear: build another lab, and it too will burn.